The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, and he said, "The goal of our instruction is love, from a pure heart and a clear conscience and a sincere faith." I think that's 1 Timothy 1:5. But that passage has, it's like all of life grounded into its roots. The goal of our instruction is love, from a pure heart, a clear conscience, and a sincere faith. I want to tell you a story in which the Lord helped me to purify my own heart in ways that I did not anticipate. See, a few years ago, there was a man in my life who, we were a train wreck together. Frankly, I don't think either one of us liked each other. We tried. We would talk baseball, but nothing else that we talked about would be very good, would end up in very good places. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of pain from interactions that we'd had, things that had been done and said. And of course, I had opinions. And often they got in the way of good relationship. Well, for several years, there were different things that I would try to break through. I knew that somewhere in the background, the real problem I had was my own problem. Because it was the kind of thing that kept coming up under one leader or another. And I just didn't know what that was or what to do with it. And there were times when I would walk through things like pray for your enemies, and I would spend time praying for this fellow. Even at times I went and prayed with him in hopes that that would be a breakthrough. But there came a point where the Lord stepped in, and he said, "I have 3 things I want you to do for me." And the 3 things were things I very, very did not want to do. But I was at a point on my journey where I knew that the only way forward was to walk into these things. So I took them one at a time. There was a men's group that the man had started, and I had not gone because I just knew the teaching would not be worth my time, and I would not like it, and I'd be against it and everything else. But the Lord was clear. Go join. Go walk in this. Okay. I did. Then there was a less frequently meeting men's group that he put together, I think, for kind of reaching out to men in the community. And again, for me, there was no way. It's like I even knew he was going to be writing the material, and it's like we clash on thoughts. No way. But the Lord stepped in and was like, "Okay, that's next. I want you to go there." Okay, I'll do it. And I did. And then the third and the hardest thing. So this man was my preacher at the time, and it had been several years that I thought I need to go forward for prayer because I'm just so messed up inside. I don't know what to do. And here's where the blackness of my heart comes in. I refused to do it for so long because there was no way I wanted anyone in the congregation to think for a moment that something that man had said had gotten through to me. That's how black-hearted I was. So at the Lord's call one Sunday, I went forward and I just knelt down. In need of prayer. After a few minutes, I felt 3 different sets of hands on me. And when the service was over and I got up, there were 3 different men from very different parts of my life, of the church life. And I won't ever forget that they did that. Then a little while later, some friends were going through a very hard time, and I was in conversation with them, and so was the pastor. One Sunday, the pastor asked me to come into his office to talk about it, and we talked about what our conversations were like with these friends of mine, and how that was going, and we found that we kind of agreed on how to deal with it. Then we were going to pray, and I asked, could we kneel? So we knelt down there. We knelt down there at his couch in his office, and we really prayed. And we wrapped up. I went on to class. A little while later, we're in the service, and he's preaching. And when the sermon is done, I look over at my wife and I say, "That is the best sermon I think he's ever spoken." And she looks at me with one of those, "What are you talking about? There was nothing different here" moments. And I realized, it wasn't really the preaching that was any different. It was my own heart. The Lord had done a thing for me, within me, to make a difference. Several days later, the Lord says, "Hey, there's one more thing. I want you to write an apology, a very public apology. Because there are things that I had said and written about him without naming him that some people would know were about him." And so I set about writing a genuine, heart-level apology. And I determined that before I publish this on my blog, which, by the way, it still is the most read blog I have, I would take it to him and ask him, "Does this say enough?" So I got done writing it, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I could really use a few minutes of your time sometime. Could we talk pretty soon, like this weekend or something?" He ended up inviting me to his house, and we talked in his den, and I handed him a copy, and I asked him to read it. He read through it. He seemed, I don't think visibly shaken is the right way to put it, but struck. And he said, yeah, that is enough." And he seemed to really appreciate it. And I told him I was going to put it on my blog, and he says, "You don't have to do that." And I said, "Oh yeah, I do. I know my call." So I posted it, and I'm going to tell you, over the next several months, there were some very obvious signs that our relationship had changed. in ways that it never would have without the intervention of God. And the work that He was doing and has continued to do on purifying my heart. Because, as Paul said, the goal of our instruction is love, from a pure heart and a clear conscience and a sincere faith.